Welcome to Women We Should Know with international speaker, mindset reset mentor, author, and your host, Leslie Michaels. With audacious honesty and candor, the Women We Should Know podcast presents the wisdom and life-empowering insights of women who are the embodiments of innovation and social evolution. Please join Leslie as she shares potent conversations that will inspire your personal and professional evolutions. Welcome to Women We Should Know. Welcome back to another episode of Women We Should Know. This is the podcast where we bring you the voices, the audacity, and the life-changing initiatives of women who are out there coloring outside of the lines and refusing to speak and be in other people's paradigms and other people's status quo. I started this podcast because I had this tradition of having wonderful conversations with women such as this. And it occurred to me one day, I want to have more. And okay, this gives me a good excuse. I can create a podcast. Every conversation I have with these women enriches me. It is my greatest desire that they enrich the listeners, all of you as well, that each one of you finds at least one or two nuggets that you can take away with you that is going to help you see the world differently, help you see yourself more clearly. And today we have a woman who might just be able to help inspire you to do that. Wendy Murphy has served as an adjunct professor of sexual violence law at New England Law, Boston, for over 15 years. Where she also co-directs the Women's and Children's Advocacy Project under the Center for Law and Social Responsibility. A former visiting scholar at Harvard Law School, Wendy prosecuted child abuse and sex crimes cases for many years. In 1992, she founded the first organization in the nation to provide pro bono legal service to crime victims. Wendy is an impact litigator whose work in state and federal courts has changed the law to better protect the constitutional and civil rights of victimized women and children. She writes and lectures widely on the constitutional and civil rights of women and children and criminal justice policy, and is a contributing editor for the Sexual Assault Report. Wendy's impact litigation in the area of campus sexual assault beginning in the early 1990s includes groundbreaking victories against Harvard College in 2002 and Harvard Law School and Princeton University in 2010, which cases led the way to widespread awareness and reforms, including the well-known April 2011 Dear Colleague letter. Wendy is a popular and bold speaker on the lecture circuit who describes herself as fiercely nonpartisan. She is a well-known television legal analyst, an Emmy award-winning journalist, and regularly provides legal analysis for network and cable news programs. Her first book, And Justice for Some, was published by Penguin Sentinel in 2007 and released in paperback in 2013. And we're going to speak about a lot more of her writings, including some of the more controversial. So I am pleased to introduce you to welcome Wendy Murphy. Hi, Wendy. I am so happy that you joined us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here, Leslie.
You have been, let us say, on the hot seat for a long time by choice in order to help others who don't want to be on the hot seat and don't want to be marginalized and don't want to be minimalized. What started this move in you? Was this something you were recognized at a very young age, or did you evolve to this?
Good question. I was definitely born with some kind of sass because I could read when I was 3 and when I went to kindergarten. Because I was such a good reader by then, my teacher would put me in charge of the class and go off to meetings, and I'd read to the group. And let's just say that was kind of a dangerous thing to do to me because it led me to believe that I was in charge of the world at a very young age.
Yes.
I was quickly disabused of that notion, but no, but there is something I think in some people they're just precocious, and that
Mhm.
definitely defines me. But I'm not sure that I was planning for this particular career at all. I mean, I always was sensitive to injustice, as a lot of people are. But in terms of how I landed doing the civil rights and constitutional rights work that I do, especially on behalf of women, it really was very simple. I came into it organically. I got my first job out of law school as a prosecutor, and so I was in court a lot, um, representing the state in cases that involve violence against women. And the courts were treating women differently. And judges, for example, would say to me, uh, "I want you to tell the victim to turn over all of her counseling records and school records and everything from her entire life, all
Mhm.
the private and privileged and confidential documents that would apply to someone's life. The judges were telling me to tell the victim, turn them over to the defense, and I
Mhm.
kept objecting, and I would say, you can't do that. I mean, it's not right. That's not what the law says. And of course their response would be, well, I'm allowed to interpret the Constitution to, on behalf of the perpetrator, to mean that you have to turn all this stuff over. I'd say, but you're not doing it to other types of crime victims. You never do this to the victim of a carjacking or a robbery. Men, in other words, you only do this when the victim is a woman, and disproportionately in rape cases. That's discrimination, judge. You can't do that. And they
Mhm.
would roll their eyes. And then one said to me, uh, Miss Murphy, he pulled his glasses down after I made one of these objections again. You cannot treat this woman differently than
Mhm.
you treat other types of crime victims. That's not legal. And a judge said, Miss Murphy, you are the government. Your job is to state the law, not complain about it. If you want to change the law, you have to get a different job. And I remember where I was standing when he said that, because I thought, oh, all right, that's the problem. I can do what I want to do in terms of, calling attention to this injustice and trying to fix
Mhm.
it, but I
Right.
can't be a prosecutor at the same time. I can't work for the state while I'm
Right.
doing that. Of course, I also thought, well, Jesus, if I'm not allowed to object when the court engages in sex discrimination
Mhm.
and the defense isn't going to object, who else is going to object? Like, there's no one else in the room who can object. There's no one monitoring our legal system to make sure that when judges discriminate against women, someone does something about it.
Right.
Uh, so when he told me that it was not my job to speak up against sex discrimination, especially in the criminal justice system, and that I should get a different job if I wanted to fix that problem, I took him very seriously. Left the DA's office and immediately started doing pro bono work on behalf of women with regard to this particular issue, the mistreatment of women in criminal justice cases where they were subjected to these unfair orders to turn over confidential records, where no one else was being subjected to those orders. And uh, and I said to my husband at the time, I'm just going to do this volunteer work for about a year. I'm going to fix this problem, and then I'm going to get a real job as a lawyer. And that was many, many years ago. And I never got that real job. And that's because, once you start peeling back the onion and you say, oh, here's this one issue, I think this is just a discrete issue.
Right.
And you realize, oh no, this is a much bigger problem.
Right.
So that's really where I started. And it's kind of how I'm still doing it. The problem is massive. The underlying cause behind why judges in every courtroom, not just criminal cases, but judges in every courtroom, are mistreating women in this discriminatory way, the cause is our Constitution, the United States Constitution. It
Mhm.
allows the different and worse treatment of women, the second class treatment of women in the name of justice, because the Constitution has never granted women full equality under the law. That's why we fought for the ERA. It was unsuccessful, but people forget, well, what does it mean that women don't have equality? How does that manifest? And for me as an attorney, I think the most important thing I can say is it means that whenever you go to court as a woman, you are in that room and the judge is sitting up there making decisions, and that judge is allowed to treat you differently and worse than men because you are a woman. So you're more likely to lose custody of your children. You're less likely to have a rape charge enforced on par with the way the system handles other kinds of crimes against other kinds of people. We know statistically that if you steal something from a woman, you're much more likely to be punished than if you rape her or beat her. Um, we've never, ever prosecuted or punished men who abuse women effectively. I mean, the numbers are abysmal. I think less than 2 or 3% of men who rape women ever spend one day behind bars. Most batterers are never arrested, much less prosecuted, much less incarcerated. And no surprise, the average, a daily average of the number of women who are killed by men in this country is over 5 a day. Over 5 women a day on average are killed by men in this country, and that's almost twice as many as 30 years ago. So we had a problem. But what we have as a problem in terms of how women are suffering terribly, we really need to understand its primary cause. You can run around and say, oh, let's pass a law that requires this or that. No, 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 no. You have to have the baseline in place, that baseline guarantee of equal treatment under the law. Because you can pass a law that says women must be treated equally. But then if you go to court to enforce it and the judge says, well, that's not what the Constitution says, the Constitution doesn't require me to enforce that law equally on behalf of women, then all the laws are meaningless. It's like pushing crumbs around on a half-empty plate. You'll never be able to pass enough laws to actually give women equal treatment under the law until the Constitution is rebuilt to guarantee it.
Well, when the Constitution was written, it's no secret it was written by men, and it is no secret that women were property. They were chattel at that time, and that bled in to the undertones and the interpretations of the Constitution even today. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you look at where we came from, both with regard to slavery of enslavement of Black people, and then the status of women, they're really the same. I mean, we very blatantly enslaved Black people, put them on plantations, made them do work for free, but we sort of did the same thing to women, only we put them in homes and enslaved them and got work out of them for free.
And convinced them that they had a good life because they got to dominate over the other enslaved people. And that was a very much a bait and switch situation.
Well, there was that. And then there was also, the romanticization of family life. When you persuade a woman that she isn't enslaved so much as, beloved, then your enslavement doesn't really feel very bad, does it?
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, when our Constitution was developed, and in particular, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it says all men are created equal.
Yes, it does.
Abigail Adams, in communication with her husband, John Adams, was very clear that there was a problem afoot even before the Constitution was first written, because she knew John was working with others to draft a constitution so we could create our country after we declared our independence. And she said, everyone remembers she said something like, remember the ladies, right? There's some language, we will foment a revolution. No, what she actually said, and she was very fierce about it. She said, we know that men are treacherous and they are absolutely going to exploit and take advantage of women unless you make sure they're equal in the Constitution. I'm paraphrasing what she
Of
said,
course.
but John said back basically, do you think we're stupid? We would never give women equality because that would be so bad for men. I mean, there was a real sincerity to their communication. But of course, here comes our Constitution, and especially with regard to the way our Bill of Rights was drafted, it doesn't say women cannot have these rights under the Bill of Rights. It just is written in a way that doesn't ensure women have any rights at all. And at that time, because women were considered covered by their husbands or fathers' rights, there was this rule in place called coverture. And coverture literally comes, that's where the word cover comes from, or vice versa. It means the rights of the men in your life cover you as a woman. So you don't need your own rights. You're covered. Mm-hmm. It's not that you don't have rights, it's that they're indirect. They're through a man. And so if a woman was raped, that was considered a crime against a man's property rather than a crime against the woman herself. Right. And that was the beginning. And then the worst thing that happened was in 1868, when after the Civil War, we amended our Constitution to add the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the so-called Reconstruction Amendments. And most people know the 13th abolished slavery. The 14th gave us equal protection and due process rights. It also said that only white men could vote. So that was very clear in the 14th Amendment that women weren't part of it, right?
They were intentionally excluded.
Intentionally excluded by the use of the word male, which had never appeared before in the Constitution. Now it's explicit. And then in the 15th Amendment, we gave the right to vote to Black men, but not women of any color. And so women were really upset because the 14th Amendment said, persons shall have equal protection and due process rights. So women quickly went to court and said, we're persons, right? So we should be able to sue to make sure that we have equal protection, equal treatment under the laws. And the Supreme Court, as fast as lightning, issued rulings in the late 1800s saying, nope, women are not persons. They gave corporations personhood in the late 1800s, but not women. Women didn't get personhood under the 14th Amendment until, most people can't believe this, but it's true, 1971. That wasn't that long ago. And in 1971, when the Supreme Court finally said, okay, women are persons, it said, but they're not full persons. We're giving them second-class personhood, barely recognized, but at least we're going to consider them people, persons, under the 14th Amendment. Some people thought that was great because at least we're now in there. And it did have the effect of requiring all states to abolish laws that they had in place at the time, which were legal, which forbade women to sit on juries, forbade women to get credit in their own name, forbade women in some cases to own certain kinds of property. With the personhood status, low as it was, we at least now had the ability to challenge those kinds of laws, and things did improve, but they didn't improve much. They just, they gave us a foot in the door, but then the door kind of squished our feet, if you will, and we're still there.
We are still there. And what I find a lot of women in this country don't know, they think I am out of my mind when I even suggest it, is that in that same time frame is when it finally state by state started to become illegal for a man to demand essentially a circumcision of his wife to avoid promiscuity.
Yeah. Oh, there are so many ways that our male supremacy enables men to do harm to women, not just controlling reproduction, which we know is a nightmare today, but doing certain things to their bodies, including rape. I mean, if you look at how rape laws are designed, they actually allow men to rape women by prohibiting only rapes that are forcible. So and this is true in every state, with a couple of exceptions where they have a special category for rapes without force. But in Massachusetts and in many states, you cannot go to court. You cannot prove that a rape occurred unless there's penetration without consent. That's universally required in all states, right? But in Massachusetts and in most states, you also need to prove that force was used. Well, most rapes don't require use of force. Most men who rape their wives, they don't need to use force. They can use the power of their authority in the home. They can use the coercive power of the fact that they have the money, that they control the purse strings, the physicality of men's bodies. There's so many ways that men don't need to use force, as that word is defined in the law, to get sexual access to women's bodies. So, to be perfectly honest, rape in this country is legal because
Mhm.
it's only illegal if you also use force.
Exactly.
And, most people don't realize that. So women will be coerced into some kind of sexual event and they call the police and say, well, I didn't consent. And the police will say, but did he use force? And if they
Mhm.
say no, that's not a crime. And what's ironic, not ironic, but what's so vividly cruel about this in terms of proving that women are not worth very much in this country and we're worth less than stuff, that goes without saying. If you take my money without my consent, that's a crime. It's called larceny. If
Correct.
you if you also use force, it's a more serious crime called robbery. But if you take my bodily integrity without my consent, you penetrate my body without my consent, it's not a crime
Not a crime.
unless you also use force. So, how come it's more illegal to take my stuff than to violate my body when we say people are more important than stuff? That's really not true. It's belied by the way our laws are written, and it's certainly belied by the way our laws are under enforced.
And you'd be hard pressed to find a woman who is not aware of the fact that those few women who have the courage to file charges against a rapist, they are put on trial
Yeah.
because they have to. How do you prove the force? They are put on trial. And then we have situations such as, was it 2 years ago when the judge said of the young man, he had obviously raped, there had been force. Other young males from the campus had testified that in tears at what they had witnessed and pulled him off. And the judge determined that it was going to destroy that young man's life to put him in prison, with absolute disregard to the fact that this woman's life had already been destroyed.
Yeah, it's very common for not just male judges, but for judges in general to perpetuate the ultimate ideology behind our rape laws, which is that men are entitled to do certain things to women. And unless it's really egregious, we're not going to punish them. Sometimes judges say it out loud because they're too stupid not to. They literally will say, well, what was she wearing? And all these silly things that have nothing to do with whether a crime occurred or whether he deserves punishment.
Yes.
And in fact, we know from research that 85 to 90% of rapes occur between people who know each other and are often the product of an exploitation or a betrayal of trust. So,
Right.
you make yourself vulnerable to a man, and rather than respecting the fact that he has some access to you because he's your boyfriend or your husband or a friend, rather
Mhm.
than respecting that special access they have to you, you exploit it. You take advantage and use your power to, get what you want, regardless of what she wants, and regardless of the fact that she clearly doesn't want you in her body. We
Mhm.
just don't honor the equality between the sexes. And that's partly because the law doesn't require us to, but it's also simply that men feel this sense of entitlement granted to them by the Constitution, but also given to them by our culture. And again, the research shows that for men who explain or are willing to answer the question, why did you do this? Talking about sexual assault, they'll say, because they had a sense of entitlement, that they
Yes.
felt they had the right or the authority to act, or that they didn't fear consequences. So when you see that in the data over and over again, it's like,
Mhm.
we know how to fix this, right?
Right.
This is the problem. It's not men running around with knives, jumping out and raping women down dark alleys, although that does happen. The vast majority of cases are between people who know each other, and they happen because the law allows it and culture indulges it. So even if the law said men shouldn't do this, we wouldn't judge them very harshly if they did, because our culture is seeping, just filled with the stereotypes and mythologies that facilitate men getting away with bad behavior, and doing it with impunity, giving them the sense that it's not only okay because the law says it's okay. No one in your neighborhood or family, no one's going to judge you harshly either.
Right.
So there are not
Right.
only no legal consequences, there are no moral consequences, no cultural consequences, and in fact, you may well be propped up as a hero because you did the manly thing. You overtook her. You helped yourself. I wish I could
Exactly.
say we've evolved since rape law began, but it's actually gotten a lot worse. And I say that based on data primarily. We know that the numbers of sexual assaults, the numbers of domestic violence incidents, the numbers of femicides where men kill women because they're women are just, you look at the line over time and it's gone up, 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 up. A big reason for that is not just our Constitution, which is obviously the underlying driving force, but it's that there's a lot of money in violence against women, and people don't realize this. So I love to share this, which is when you say it and people go, oh, now it makes sense. Why is there money in violence against women? Who's paying rapists? Well, the answer is pornography and sex trafficking primarily.
Mhm.
Billions and billions and billions,
Mhm.
hundreds of billions of dollars are made from the commodification and the sale of either human bodies, mostly women, sometimes children, but also through the video recording of these brutal attacks on women.
Mhm.
So it's both industries, although they are obviously part of the same industry. And even on college campuses, which many people don't realize, and the vast majority of college campus rapes involve men who are drugging the women, and the women think
Right.
women think they were drunk, but they were actually drugged, but they don't know
That's
they were
right.
drugged because they don't know what being drugged feels like. And they did have a little bit to drink. So it's a real invisibility problem.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
the point is that men on college campuses intentionally drug women and then rape them and record it and make a fortune uploading it on the internet. And schools are not only doing very little about it, they're actually fully aware that this is an industry. There's a lot of money being made on college campuses by these perpetrators. And the colleges will not even talk about either the drugging or the role of pornography in the sale of these videos. They'll just talk about it as if it's, two people got drunk and it's unfortunate that they had some bad sex that night.
Are the universities themselves financially benefiting from this?
Well,
Because
that's a hard question for me to answer. But if you ask me, are all institutions in this country that are designed to promote social hierarchies, are they all benefiting from these
there we go.
extremely lucrative
Mhm.
industries? I
Right.
think the answer is the relationship between institutions and moneyed interests goes without saying, right?
Mhm.
That's why institutions exist, to promote and protect power, wealth, and social hierarchies. And women, are the not only are we at the bottom of the list, we are the product to be sold. So, it's like, I'm trying to think of a comparable analogy, but if you people think about slavery in this way, we're very comfortable and we realize that the reason Black people stayed enslaved is because it was making a lot of profit for landowners who could get their work done for free. Well, the price of abolition, the price of getting the 13th Amendment done and freeing Black people from slavery was expensive to those industries.
Mhm.
But liberating women from their enslavement and second class citizenship, forget enslaved on plantations, just where we are in that second class legal status. If we actually gave women full equality, the profits in the industries that I mentioned would suffer terribly, because women would now have authority to fight back. They'd have authority to file, lawsuits against the government for disproportionately failing to file rape and domestic violence charges. They'd have they'd have enormous new power to challenge the money that's being made from the commodification of their bodies. And we don't think about women's second class citizenship in that way, but we need to. We need to realize that fixing slavery cost X amount of dollars. Fixing women's current enslavement in second class citizenship is going to be exponentially more expensive, and that's why people resist it.
Exactly. Now, I'm a data freak. You can sit here and give me data all day, but I know that I have some listeners out there going, huh? So let me concretize this, if I may, in terms of the acceptability factor of rape and the degree to which it is obvious when we want to notice. I'm going to use the former occupant of the White House as an example. When he was running the first time, Ivana Trump released this whole statement about him regularly raping her. And he came out with a statement and said, I can't rape her. She's my wife. She belongs to me. I can do what I want. And he was still put in the White House. Everyone who voted for him was,
which was
everyone who voted for him was complicit in supporting that. Now, that's not to just pick on them. It's to say that that's how broad this societal issue is.
Look at what Bill Clinton did with Monica Lewinsky. Women's groups continued to support Bill Clinton after it came out that that was an intern. Like the law has been clear for a long time. You can't do that with an intern.
And even when she has come out and said she went out of her way for a long period of time to seduce, she's still an intern.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I don't care. Look, if you do naked cartweels down the middle of Main Street, that doesn't give anybody the right to touch you, period. Discussion. But what I think
we're going to run out of time here.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to ask you, first of all, to come back and let's do a part 2, because we have just barely scratched the surface. And second of all, associate this to the benefits that we would receive from the ERA in our brief time that we have left.
Yeah, the best thing about the ERA, and let me just say what it says, because then people can really understand how simple it is, because it's not that complicated. It says equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. It just means you have to not just write the laws in a way that explicitly say women must be treated the same as men, right? So you can't write a law that excludes women or gives men more rights. But also when you go to court, this is the thing people don't talk enough about. The beauty, the magic of the ERA is that when you go to court as a woman, and I don't care if it's family court where women suffer horrendous bias, horrendous maltreatment, and grotesque discrimination. Every state in this country mistreats women in family court. There's research all over the place about this. But when a woman goes to family court, criminal court, civil court, housing court, you name the court, unless you have the ERA in place, the judge has the right, has the power, has the ability to rule against her unjustly, and there's nothing you can do about it. So if you stand up in front of a judge and say, Your Honor, that's discrimination. You just treated me worse simply because I'm a woman, the judge can say back to you, they don't say this, but they can say back to you, yeah, but I'm allowed to, because you don't have equality under the Constitution. So none of your rights are protected equally. This even applies, when you think about equal protection of the laws and the ERA, which would give us full equal protection, we say, well, what does it mean? Like, is it about equal pay? No. Equal protection of all laws means it runs the gamut from you going to the municipal corner office to get a dog license,
yes,
to the First Amendment, the most important amendment, which is why we put it first, free speech, and everything in between, including the 13th Amendment, which prohibits slavery. Unless the ERA is in place, unless women have equal protection of all laws, they can be denied a dog license. They can be denied free speech rights. They can be enslaved despite the 13th Amendment, because the 13th Amendment doesn't apply equally to women without the guarantee of equal treatment in the Constitution right next to the 13th Amendment. The
That's right.
13th is worth very little to women without a guarantee of equal treatment in some other provision of the Constitution, either the 14th Amendment or the Equal Rights Amendment, which is kind of like the repair work we needed for the 14th
Right.
Amendment that was first
Right.
adopted. So it's really that simple. It's not about equal pay. It's about equal everything.
It's
just
about equal
treatment.
right to exist as a sentient human being, an
As an
autonomous
equal,
human being.
right. And by the way, that doesn't mean everything we do has to always mean we all get equal everything at all times. You know, we're not all going to become communists where we all make $10 a week. That's not what equality under the law means. It means equal treatment
Yes.
under all other laws.
Yes.
We're not going to become, you know, all the same. We're not the same. Men are not the same as women.
No.
The laws are never going to work perfectly. But when the Constitution says it's okay to treat women worse, you've got a problem that will manifest in all aspects of women's lives, from how much they make to how they're treated behind closed doors in their homes to how literally they are treated when they try to exercise their free speech rights.
In perpetuity until that is changed.
Right.
Period.
No question. And it has to come first.
Yes.
Women spend a lot of energy and resources trying to change laws. Oh, let's go get an equal pay law. Oh, let's go change the laws for this and that. Nothing we do in terms of changing laws, either at our state legislatures or at Congress, is going to make a dent until the Constitution is rebuilt with women in it and that guarantee of fully equal treatment is explicit. We only lost abortion last summer because, as Alito said in his lead opinion in the Dobbs case, women aren't in the Constitution. Like, historically, there's nothing in there that says anything about them. And he's right. It's not just that abortion isn't in there, women aren't in there.
Exactly.
And so how do we overturn Dobbs and restore Roe versus Wade? You have to reboot the Constitution to erase the rationale behind Judge Alito's opinion and say, Dobbs doesn't work anymore. Why? Because that was decided under a different Constitution. Now we have this Constitution and women are fully equal in it. So everything changes. We need that badly, and we need it yesterday.
And the developers of the Constitution, the deliverers of the Constitution said it should be overhauled every 20 years.
At least.
We are overdue.
We're overdue. That's a good way to put it. And as women's rights go, as basic humane treatment of women goes, women have been enslaved. So we were sort of fourth-class citizens because we didn't even exist as persons in the beginning. Then we became persons in 1971, but third-class persons. The law changed a little bit after 71 and most recently in 96, where we got a bump up to second-class persons, but we're still not equal. And only the ERA can fix that. And just to, you know, leave your listeners and viewers with a little provocative idea. When I first started working on the ERA many years ago, I read a lot about Ruth Bader Ginsburg because everyone holds her up as the hero, someone who spent a lot of time trying to get women's equality established in the Constitution, both before she became a judge and after. And what I write in my new piece is that she wasn't really heroic at all, and that some of what she did actually undermined the fight for women's equality and ultimately helped to kill the ERA. The reason I tell that story, and I can explain it in detail if and when we meet again, which I hope we will, is because it's so important for us not to get distracted. Don't fall in line be like a lemming behind this leader or that leader. Sometimes the leaders that get propped up are bad for us. How can we as women be smarter, be more skeptical? How do we know who we should be following and whether they actually have a sincere commitment to women's rights, or are they a prop meant to distract us like a red herring? My feelings about Ruth Bader Ginsburg are really pretty negative. They didn't start that way. I've met her several times. I really felt a great deal of affection for her for a long time as a lawyer. But once I started to read her work more carefully, especially around the Equal Rights Amendment, especially after she spoke out against the Equal Rights Amendment in early 2020. It opened my eyes, and unfortunately, I can't unknow it. So rather than pretend, I just want other people to share in the knowledge that I acquired, and to be willing to be uncomfortable. It hurts our insides.
Yes.
We want her to be our hero. We want to feel good about her. But if the
We
truth
want to feel like we have a hero. I
Yes,
believe
we
women
do.
want to believe they have a hero. There are so
Yep.
many male heroes. She was the only one.
She was a very important, super smart, I mean, incredibly bright. But the truth is, not all of the people who are propped up are the ones we should follow. And
Exactly.
I hope if my work does anything good for the women's movement, it will be that I have taught as many people as possible to be more skeptical of who you follow and why, and always be brave enough to step away. Don't just follow along like a lemming. We don't have the luxury anymore of hoping that our leaders are going to do the right thing. Neither political party actually supports women's equality. That's a painful thing to hear. Sometimes the Democrats feel better to us, and they certainly say out loud, way more often than Republicans do, that they support the ERA. But if you see what they've done, the Republicans have blocked the ERA. Well, so did the Democrats. Trump, when he was in office, did very aggressive things to block women's equality, to fight against women's equality. In my lawsuit, one of the lawsuits around the ERA that I filed in 2020, Trump was in office. His Department of Justice fought against me and blocked the ERA. And I was suing to validate the ERA. And I said, I got to vote for Biden, because Biden says, and Kamala Harris, they say they support the ERA. I'm going to vote for Biden. Well, we got them in, and they blocked the ERA the same way Trump did, and continued fighting against the ERA in my court case, in another court case. It's just devastating to realize that you only have the choice between two parties, Republican or Democrat. Neither of them supports women's equality. It's the only thing women need. I shouldn't say it's the only thing, but it's the most important thing women need. And we have no one to vote for. That is devastating. That is devastating and deeply anti-democratic, that half the population, 167 million women, have no one to vote for because neither party actually wants us to be equal. What country is this? I sometimes.
And that is the question, Wendy.
My country.
Yes, that's the question. And that's the question I'd like to begin with next time. I know there are listeners saying, what? Biden's not supporting us? Okay, tune in for part 2. What do you mean? This is what we need. What do you mean we have no one to vote for? And I'd like to discuss that. And I'd like to discuss how Alice Paul started the ERA. So many haven't heard of Alice Paul. How she worked to get women's votes, how she created an all-women party and the impact it had, because there are suggestions out there now that it is time for that again. So I'm just putting all that out for the listeners that, oh yes, we aren't complete with having juicy conversations here. I have no doubt that every one of you had a what? Or I always suspected that, or I need to know more moment. I want you to do something. Now, you who've been with me a long time know I'm all about this. And I usually say 1, but today I'm going to say 3. What 3 women do you know who really need this information? Be a sister, be a friend, be an ally, and share this forward with them. It is so important that, yes, we get the ERA, but it is so important we start stepping up and being present with each other, for each other, because that is how we amass the power of our 50.53% of the population. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you
Well said, Leslie.
so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you. I'm delighted, and I can't wait to come back.
Okay, my friends, watch out. We will have a part 2, not in 5 minutes, but I promise. And I always keep my promises to you. Thank you for joining us today. And remember this as you go forward. You truly are stronger and wiser than you have been taught to know.